It's a Tuesday, October 5th, and it's time for your Barbados Today morning news update. After repeated calls for global equity in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, Prime Minister Mia Mottley is now lobbying for vaccine production in Barbados, and she said she plans to use the UN Conference on Trade and Development that opened here on Monday as a platform to lobby for a manufacturing or bottling plant which could then be used to supply the region with vaccines. She maintained that if the COVID-19 pandemic is to be conquered, vaccines are needed to be readily available across the world.
We are at a point where the pandemic will finish when we decide as a people globally that it must finish. And until such time, we will continue to have persons being affected by it, and we are in the race against further mutations and variants that may well be worse than what we see in Delta, which is bad enough. We can only ask that all of our actions move to a point of vaccine equity. And we can only ask that there also be an urgency about identifying locations such as ours and others in other parts of the world to become locations for the manufacturing and or bottling of vaccines, so as to ensure a more ready capacity to distribute to those most in need.
Speaking during a press conference held at the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Centre, Prime Minister Mottley insisted that the possibility of a vaccine factory was realistic.
I do not accept that it is impossible for us to achieve that. I do not accept that it is impossible for vaccine and manufacturing and bottling plants to be available throughout every region in this world to ensure the shortest distance to people's arms. If we can achieve that, and if we can push for that in UNCTAD, then I believe that we not only lay the foundation for the conquering of this pandemic, although it is likely to become endemic first, regrettably, but also for what we are concerned about, what we call the slow motion pandemic, the one of antimicrobial resistance to which I referred earlier. This threatens to reverse a century in medical progress. And a visit to the dentist or the having of a child can now be as dangerous to you as someone putting a gun to your head. And why? Because if you catch an infection, especially one of the superviruses, a lot of the antibiotics that now exist in the world are not capable of curing you. If that is not enough in the middle of this pandemic to allow for a burst of investment in research, then I do not know what will be.
The Ministry of Labour is investigating reports that two more local companies have issued vaccine mandates to their employees. However, Minister of Labour and Social Partnership Relations, Colleen Jordan, says he has second-hand information on the matter, but no official documentation on which his ministry can act. We get more in this report from Emmanuel Joseph.
Jordan said the Labour Department will therefore have to investigate the authenticity of media reports, so his officers will be better placed to deal with the matter. He said while the department was in a position last week to write to Hill Milling and Lionel C. Hill Supermarket Group of Companies, advising them to immediately withdraw their memo mandating staff to be vaccinated by September 30th or be fired, this was not the case with Rubis and Digicel.
So I asking my department to check on those two to see if anybody had approached us on it, or if there's any documentation, any official documentation over there that we can use to find out what is happening. Because we don't just do it based on documentation. Mm-hmm. The Labor Department would have actually contacted management at Hill and spoken to them. Right. And our thing, so we don't just fly off, hear something and write something. Mm-hmm. That'd be more from my end. That is what I sent out, because right. I speak from a policy perspective. Right. But technical people would be investigating actual situations. So I try to find where those other two businesses, their letters, or if they issued letters, beside what I hear in the media.
Chief Executive Officer of the Hills Group, Richard Ashby, who last week rejected the Liberty Department's advice to withdraw his memo, could not be reached on Monday night to say if his ultimatum given to the two unvaccinated workers to submit vaccine certificates by payday last weekend had been complied with. Minister Jordan said on Monday night the ball was now in the court of the affected workers of Hill Milling and Lionel C. Hill Supermarket to take legal action against their employer if they so desired. Emmanuel Joseph for Barbados Today.
The island's top cop and one of his deputies will stay on the job a little longer. Attorney General Dale Marshall made the announcement in a statement issued by the Barbados Government Information Service. Police Commissioner Tyrone Griffith and Deputy Commissioner Oral Reid were set to demit office earlier this year, but were asked to stay on until the end of September. Marshall said this has now been extended by another month. The minister explained that while the process of selecting a new commissioner is progressing, it was in the interest of ensuring the continued smooth running of the Royal Barbados Police Force that the decision was taken to further delay the pre-retirement leave of their high-ranking officers.
There's regional and international news after this short break.
Barbados Today, news you can trust.
To news from the region, the re-establishment of security, especially in the Port-au-Prince metropolitan area, must be prioritized by Haitian authorities. That's according to the head of the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti, Helen Lalim. She told a Security Council meeting that insecurity is now rampant in the capital as kidnappings are once again on the rise and gangs have extended their control over large portions of the city.
The reestablishment of security, especially in the Port-au-Prince metropolitan area, must be prioritized by Haitian authorities. Since June, a significant and sudden increase in gang violence has caused the displacement of some 19,000 people from the communes of Cité Soleil, Croix-des-Bouquets, Delmas, and the Port-au-Prince neighborhood of Martissant. The control that gangs exercise around strategic entry and exit points of the capital has had a detrimental impact on Haiti's economy and the movement of people and goods.
The UN official also urged the member states to contribute to Haiti's recovery and emergency fund.
Even as relief operations are still ongoing, early recovery and the restoration of livelihoods must be strongly supported in areas affected by the earthquake. It is a race against time to ensure that children can return to school, that farmers do not miss the next planting season, and that people currently living in spontaneous displacement camps return to their homes as quickly as possible. We must ensure that Haiti does not become a forgotten crisis.
And finally, economists at the World Trade Organization have upgraded their forecasts for trade in 2021 and 2022. It comes after the resurgence of global economic activity in the first half of this year lifted merchandise trade above its pre-pandemic peak. The WTO's Director General now estimates that the volume of world merchandise trade will increase by 10.8% in 2021 and then by 4.7%.
Quarterly growth should slow in the second half of this year as the volume of trade approaches its pre-pandemic trend. While it is not captured by this forecast, trade in commercial services remains well below its pre-pandemic level. The trade recovery is strong but unequal, mirroring the K-shaped recovery in global economic output. Some regions, those with access to vaccines and sufficient fiscal space, are recovering strongly, while poorer regions with mostly unvaccinated populations are lagging behind. Moreover, the risks to the outlook are firmly on the downside. The pandemic itself is far from over, and new outbreaks and variants of COVID-19 could weigh on trade and output through 2022.
That's news. But for the very latest, visit us at www.barbadostoday.bb. You can also subscribe to our e-paper, email updates, or like us on Facebook, and sign up for our breaking news alerts via WhatsApp. We're also on Izumi Media in bus terminals, as well as screenplay at supermarkets and gas stations near you. And you can also hear us on Mix 96.9 FM and Capital Media HD 99.3 FM.